The hospital monitor's beep was a cruel metronome, counting down the seconds I had left. I saw his face. Elliot struffed the haze of painkillers, his hazel eyes wet with tears as he whispered, "I'll wait for you, Caleb. Always." But he didn't wait. I woke up 6 months later, a ghost in my own body, to learn Elliot had married someone else. The news hit like a second car crash, splintering what little strength I'd clawed back in that sterile ICU bed. San Francisco's foggy skyline stretched beyond the hospital window, indifferent to the betrayal that burned in my chest. My name is Caleb Nguyen, and this is the story of how I survived not just the accident, but the man who swore he'd love me forever. It was 2023, and we'd been together for 3 years, building a life in a cramped Mission District apartment filled with secondhand furniture and dreams too big for our bank accounts. Elliot Carter was a painter, his canvases bursting with color, his laughter a melody that could drown out the city's chaos. I was a barista by day, a poet by night, scribbling verses about the way his hands moved when he spoke, like they were chasing the wind. We were 25, broke, and incandescently in love, or so I thought. The accident happened on a Tuesday. I was biking home from the cafe, the scent of coffee still clinging to my skin, when a delivery truck ran a red light. The world spun, then went black. I don't remember the ambulance. Only fragments, Elliot's voice, the sting of IVs, the cold grip of fear. Doctors said I'd been in a coma, my body a battlefield of broken bones and fading odds. Elliot was there every day, or so the nurses told me. He'd sit by my bed, reading my poems aloud, his voice breaking on the words I'd written for him. But 6 months is a long time to wait for a ghost. When I woke, my sister Lynn was the one holding my hand, her face a mask of relief and pity. "Caleb," she said softly, "there's something you need to know." She told me about Elliot's wedding, how he'd married Julian Reyes, a gallery owner with a sleek smile and a loft in Soma. The ceremony was small, Lynn said, but the photos were everywhere online. Elliot's grin slicing through me sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. I didn't cry. Not then. I stared at the ceiling, my body still tethered to machines, and let the betrayal settle like ash. How do you mourn a love that's still alive, just no longer yours? I spent weeks in rehab, relearning how to walk, how to hold a pen, how to breathe without feeling like I was drowning. Every step was a rebellion against the life I'd lost, not just my mobility, but the future I'd imagined with Elliot. By the time I left the hospital, San Francisco had changed. Or maybe I had. The city's colors felt muted, its pulse too loud. I moved into Lynn's spare room in Oakland, her kids filling the silence with their laughter. But at night, when the house was quiet, I'd scroll through Elliot's social media, torturing myself with glimpses of his new life. Julian's arm around his waist, their dog, a scruffy mutt named Pablo, a painting Elliot finished, captioned, "For my forever." I wanted to hate him, but all I felt was a hollow ache. Then, one foggy morning, I saw him. I was at a farmer's market in Berkeley, buying peaches for Lynn, when Elliot stepped out of the crowd like a memory come to life. His hair was longer, curling at the nape, but his eyes, those damn hazel eyes, were the same. He froze, the reusable toad in his hand slipping to the ground. "Caleb." His voice was a whisper, like he was seeing a ghost. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "You look happy." The lie tasted bitter, but it was all I had. He stammered, his face pale, and mumbled something about needing to talk. I didn't stay to listen. I walked away, the weight of his gaze heavy on my back, and swore I'd never let him near my heart again. But promises to yourself are the easiest to break. That night, he called. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was a knife. "Caleb, I thought you were gone. I thought I'd lost you forever." Please, let me explain. His voice cracked, and I hated how it still stirred something in me. I deleted the message. But the next day, there was another. And another. Texts. Emails. Even a handwritten letter slipped under Lynn's door, begging for a chance to make things right. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to care. But the truth was, I wasn't just angry, I was still in love with him. And that was the worst betrayal of all. I spent days dodging Elliot's attempts to reach me, each message a pebble thrown into the still waters of my resolve. But San Francisco is a small city when you're trying to avoid someone. And fate or maybe just bad luck had other plans. A week after the farmer's market, I agreed to meet Lynn for coffee at a cafe in the Castro, a place we used to haunt in happier times. I should have known better. Elliot was there, sitting at a corner table, his sketchbook open, charcoal smudged on his fingers. He didn't see me at first, but I saw him the way his brow furrowed when he drew, the way his lips parted slightly, like he was whispering to the paper. My heart lurched. Traitor that it was. Lynn caught my arm before I could bolt. Talk to him. Caleb, she said. You'll never move on if you don't. I didn't want to move on. I wanted to rewind. To a time before the accident. Before Julian. Before the world tilted off its axis. But Lynn's eyes were steady. And I knew she was right. So I sat across from Elliot. The air between us thick with everything we hadn't said. I thought you were going to die. He started. His voice low. Raw. The doctors said you might never wake up. I couldn't, he stopped, his hands clenching the edge of the table. I couldn't keep living in that limbo. Caleb. Julian was there. He helped me through it. I didn't mean to fall in love with him. I laughed. Sharp and cold. You didn't mean to. You married him. Elliot. 6 months after I was hit. You were saying vows to someone else. My voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. But I didn't care. You promised me forever. I know. He whispered, tears brimming. I'm so sorry. I was weak. I was scared. But seeing you now, Caleb, I never stopped loving you. The words were a punch, stealing my breath. I wanted to believe him, to let his apology stitch up the wound he'd left. But trust is a fragile thing, and mine was in pieces. You don't get to say that, I said, standing. You don't get to rewrite the story because I survived. I left him there, his sketchbook abandoned, his face crumpled. But the victory felt hollow. That night, I wrote poetry for the first time since the accident, words spilling like blood onto the page. They were angry, jagged, full of pain, but they were mine. I was reclaiming something, even if I didn't know what. Elliot didn't stop. He showed up at Lynn's house, at my new job at a bookstore in No Valley, even at the physical therapy clinic where I was still rebuilding my strength. Each time, he begged, sometimes with words, sometimes with just a look. And each time, I pushed him away, building walls higher than the Golden Gate Bridge. But walls can't keep out memories. And mine were relentless. The way he'd dance with me in our kitchen. The way he'd read my poems like they were scripture. The way he'd promised to be my home. Then came the letter that broke me. It arrived on a rainy afternoon, tucked into a package with my old journal, the one I'd left at our apartment. Inside was a note in Elliot's messy scrawl. I'm leaving Julian. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I'm still yours. I always was. With it was a painting, small but vivid, of 2 figures on a beach, their hands intertwined against a sunset. It was us, or the us we used to be. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on Lynn's couch, the painting in my lap, and let myself feel everything: the rage, the longing, the fear that letting him back in would destroy me all over again. But there was something else, too: hope. Small, stubborn, like a weed pushing through concrete. The next morning, I called him. Meet me at Ocean Beach. I said, we need to talk. Ocean Beach was wild that day. The Pacific churning under a gray sky. Waves crashing like they were angry at the shore. I stood on the sand. My cane sinking slightly. The wind tugging at my jacket. Elliot arrived minutes later. His hair damp from the mist. His expression a mix of hope and dread. For a moment, we just stood there. The roar of the ocean filling the silence. I'm not here to forgive you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. I'm here to understand. He nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets. I don't deserve your time, Caleb, but I'll tell you everything. And he did. He told me about the months I was in the coma, how he'd sit by my bed until the nurses kicked him out, how he'd paint to keep from falling apart. Julian was a friend at first, someone who listened when Elliot couldn't speak. But grief is a thief, and it stole Elliot's clarity. He thought I was gone, and Julian became his lifeline. I married him because I was trying to move on, he said, his voice breaking. But it was a mistake. Every day, I saw you in everything, your poems, your laugh, the way you'd hum off-key. I was running from the pain, but it followed me. I wanted to hate him for his weakness, but I couldn't. I'd been running from the truth that I still loved him, despite everything. What now? I asked, my throat tight. You left Julian. What does that mean for us? He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. I don't know if there's an us anymore, but I want there to be. I'll do whatever it takes to earn you back. The words hung between us, fragile as sea glass. I didn't answer. Not then. We walked along the beach, the tide pulling at our silence. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight of my anger lift. Just a little. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, we met again. Coffee shops, park benches, quiet corners of the city where we could talk without the past suffocating us. Elliot was different now, humbler, his bravado stripped away. He showed me sketches he'd drawn while I was in the coma, portraits of me that captured not just my face, but my spirit. He read my new poems, the ones born of pain, and cried at the lines I'd written about him. But trust is a slow rebuild. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to falter again. And then there was Julian. He wasn't gone. Not entirely. I saw him once, outside Elliot's old gallery, his face drawn and tired. He didn't approach me, but his presence was a reminder of the life Elliot had chosen when he thought I was lost. One night, over dinner at Lynn's, I asked Elliot the question that had been gnawing at me. Why should I believe you won't run again? My voice was steady, but my hands shook under the table. He looked at me, his eyes clear. Because losing you once nearly killed me. I won't survive it again. Months passed, and San Francisco began to feel like home again. I was writing more, my poems finding their way into small journals, my voice growing stronger. Elliot and I were careful, like dancers learning new steps. We didn't rush, didn't force the pieces of our past to fit the present. But there were moments, his hand brushing mine as we walked through Golden Gate Park, his laugh when I teased him about his terrible cooking that felt like us again. The turning point came on a quiet evening in December. We were at my new apartment, a tiny studio in the Haight, string lights casting a warm glow. Elliot had brought a canvas, a gift he'd been working on in secret. When he unveiled it, I caught my breath. It was the beach painting from his letter, but finished now. The figures no longer shadows, but vibrant, alive, their hands clasped tightly. This is us, he said. Not who we were, but who we can be. I didn't have words, so I kissed him. It was tentative at first, then fierce, like we were making up for lost time. The world didn't disappear, but it softened, the edges of our pain blurring in the warmth of that moment. We didn't erase the past. Julian was still a shadow, a lesson in how love can falter under pressure. But Elliot and I were building something new, something stronger. We went to therapy, both together and apart, unpacking the wounds we'd inflicted and the ones we'd carried alone. I learned to forgive not just him, but myself, for surviving when I wasn't sure I wanted to. 1 year after I woke from the coma, we stood on Ocean Beach again, the same spot where we'd started over. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold. Elliot took my hand, his fingers steady, and said, "I'm not promising forever this time. I'm promising today, and every day after, as long as you'll have me." I smiled, the ache in my chest replaced by something lighter. "That's enough," I said. And it was. Our story isn't a fairy tale. Love, especially ours, is messy, scarred, and hard-won. But it's ours. And as we stood there, the waves singing their endless song, I knew we'd fight for it every day, every step, every breath.